Okay, I want to talk about Jimmy Page's production techniques and tricks and methods on the famous song Whole Lot of Love. And for the most part, we'll just stick to a few things that aren't as well known as the more legendary features of this legendary track. So the first thing that everybody knows about Whole Lot of Love is that it's built around an iconic riff, which is itself based on a standard blues riff. Willie Dixon's song called You Need Love. And so the track is openly based on another pre-existing song. It's not a cover, but it's an interpretation. And that's key to the production method. So let's start with what kind of insights can we gain into Page's production methods by looking at this song. So the first thing that leaps out is that Page is one of those producers that adopts his production method and his particular slant given the purpose of the song itself. In other words, every time Page tackles a song, it's a slightly different endeavor. He doesn't use the same cookie cutter approach to production. If there's a specific song that has an ethereal, dreamlike atmosphere to it, then he'll adopt production methods that function as a conduit for that feeling. And in Whole Lot of Love is a raw, straight ahead, ballsy, sexual rock song, and it's riff centered, and this is the first thing that leaps out in the production method. Now, I said he doesn't use a cookie cutter approach. That doesn't mean that he doesn't use signature techniques, and one of his signature techniques is this spontaneity, feeling of spontaneity. And so with Whole Lot of Love, it starts with a sound that's somewhat between a human sigh and a human cough, and that puts the listener in the room, which has always been one of Page's tensions with his production methods. So first sound that you hear on the track is meant to put you in space, in that energy. The next thing that you're going to hear is the riff itself, which is repeated with a bit of tasteful echo and almost isolated in the right speaker so that you will get a feeling for that hypnotic sense of the riff. When John Paul Jones's bass comes in, filling up the left speaker, what you'll have then is the classic Led Zeppelin sound minus a John Bonham. So your nervous system, your spine, your brain, and your emotions are already waiting for Bonham and compensating for Bonham as this riff builds. It is a tension and release function that Page plays like a perfect poker player playing a perfect hand in this particular instance. He's remarked in interviews that he caught on very early with Led Zeppelin that John Bonham was effective when you brought him in later in a track. And so that's what he's doing here. In fact, he does it twice in the same song, as we'll see. So once Bonham comes in, the riff has been imprinted on the listener's brain. So Page is free to now depart from this basic elemental sound structure and start toying around with different elements and using the studio as an instrument. And a lot of times people assume that Page's preoccupation is with the guitar, but in this case, he's actually putting more effort into the vocal and the bass and drums than the guitar. The guitar is set almost on autopilot. It's great guitar sound and everything, but he's letting the rest of the band spread out and fill up the track. What he's basically doing during the build-up to this track is letting the audience get a feeling for the signature identity of each member of the band. You can clearly hear Bonzo, you can hear John Paul Jones, you can hear Plant, you can hear Page. He himself has seen that Led Zeppelin is a perfect harmony of these four musicians, and he's letting the audience experience that with the band. He's asking you to be part of it, asking you to complete it as a listener. And so the production is set up again to give you this raw, inclusive feeling. Well, of course, the next thing that happens is the shocking middle section where Page just completely breaks down every single existing structure to the song and kind of dissolves it in ether. And if he had not brought the viewer into such a close relationship to the band's, basic sound in the first part, they might not be able to accept this sort of white noise section that goes on in the center. Since this song is so famous, everybody knows the production behind it between Eddie Kramer and Jimmy Page spinning dials like crazy in the studio and using echo to enhance some of the natural bleed through that came onto this track with Plant's voice. But what I want to talk about in this middle section isn't so much that anarchistic approach towards sound, this free-flowing ability to create without linear parameters that Page has talked about at length. What I want to talk about is when the song returns back to its basic straight ahead rock and roll blues structure. And so the key here again is Bonham. What we see here is Page understanding not only how the members of his band function temperamentally and emotionally and even technically, but how to use his production to spotlight the personalities of the band. Because let's face it, you can have strong characters, master musicians that walk into the studio and none of that gets translated into the recording, or very little of it does. So basically here you've got Page putting a whole lot of time and a whole lot of effort into the arrangement and into mix so that each member is able to show their identity quite clearly. But then other than that, he's kind of standing out of the way. He's not calling attention to the producer as a star. The middle section has a little bit of that, but as I say, that's done in order to show that he can dissolve his band and their identities and they still remain intact. And that as they float into that sort of dissolved state, they retain the essential Led Zeppelin identity. As we go back into the main riff and finish strong, Page shows that one of his greatest gifts as a producer is knowing how to complete a track. Now, a lot of times what happens is producers peak somewhere early on in a track, they even peak just in the general vision of it, but they fail to see it through, tidy it up, and get right down, tighten everything down. Now, there are tracks where Page is a little bit more lazy than others, but even when he does let a track kind of grind to a halt, or it seems as though it's a bit ragged, that's almost always by design. That's almost always something that he's doing on purpose in order to give a track more of a raw feeling. In the case of A Whole Lot of Love, the dissolve or the fade out is basically there to show the power of the band yet again. You can turn the volume down, but you can't turn the volume down on the power. And of course, since the song segues into acoustic song, choice to use the dissolve is another really brilliant idea. So all in all, A Whole Lot of Love is one of Page's greatest accomplishments as a producer, not only because of his visionary ideas, but because of how strongly he understood Led Zeppelin as a band and its character and the elements that make it up, and the joy he took in showing his mastery of understanding his own band. A Whole Lot of Love is a good track to start with to understand Page as a producer, although there's a lot of really interesting things that he did on Led Zeppelin 1. A Whole Lot of Love lets you see almost through his eyes how he was approaching the production of this very special band, how he became the caretaker almost of this very special sound, this foundational rock and roll sound. And he's going to use his production skills throughout the entirety of Led Zeppelin's career to push that opportunity and that gift as far as it could go. And so he literally gave everything he had as a producer to Led Zeppelin. And as I pointed out previously, he also did this on a track by track basis. This is what I think. If you have a thought on this or any other issue connected to classic or contemporary music, please comment in the section below and remember to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.